Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to Lake County, Colorado. At the base of Mount Elbert in Lake County, Colorado, you will find a picturesque valley with two massive glacial lakes puddled in the valley below the peaks. This nearly deserted area is referred to as Twin Lakes, Colorado, and sits outside of the town of Leadville. Legends dating back to the 1800s say the lake has no bottom and has deep holes that people were lost in forever. The natural bodies of water were eventually altered by engineers, connecting the two lakes. A bit later, a 135-foot dam was constructed in 1896. This is a very natural progression for freshwater supplies. Often, this progress threatens not only wildlife, but the livelihood and living of surrounding residents. In some instances, entire cities were flooded, and to this day, the spires of cathedrals and brick buildings can be found at the bottom of massive bodies of water, such as the 11-mile reservoir in the 11-mile state park. In this instance, the rising water threatened a thriving and growing resort on the south side of the lakes. The thirst for water was emanating 18 miles away in Leadville. As the city grew, residents became eager to escape the noise and smoke of the bustling city. Vacationers began to flock to the peacefulness of Twin Lakes. In the mid-1860s, on the north side of Twin Lakes, a mining camp called Dayton once existed. For a brief time, the camp served as the county seat of Lake County, Colorado. The mining camp attracted some of the earliest visitors to the area. Some of the more well-known visitors were Wheeler's and Hayden's geological survey, who proved the lakes were formed by prehistoric glaciers. Additionally, the famed photographer and painter William H. Jackson stayed for a time producing captivating paintings and photos of Twin Lakes and Leadville. Dayton blossomed into a budding town, boasting a Masonic hall, post office, general store, courthouse, multiple hotels, many homes, and even a milliner's shop or a hat maker. Notably, a common feature of an early American town was absent. There was no church, although the Masonic hall was used by traveling priests for periodic sermons. The city was described as being hopeful for its future because its neighbor, Oro City, had mostly run out of surface gold and was losing population at an alarming rate. By 1866, Dayton had overtaken Oro City and was voted to become the county seat of Lake County. The growth and optimism of Dayton were short-lived. This is because the money that the new residents of Dayton had hoped to use to develop the mining district never came. With a lack of investment, the residents of Dayton took to working the gold lodes near Twin Lakes with only pickaxes and shovels. These efforts were fruitless. The mining community moved on to the next settlement, Granite, Colorado. By 1868, Dayton was nearly abandoned. The commissioner of Granite decided to raise $500 to move the Dayton courthouse to Granite. For over a year, laborers moved the structure 10 miles south, brick by brick, where it remains to this day. At this time, the post office recognized Granite as the replacement of Dayton. The derelict village of Dayton remained abandoned through the 1870s. A vacationer from 1871, Anne B. Schneck, wrote of her visit in a journal entry, saying,
"The miners are a queer, impulsive set of folk. If a settlement of them find they are making $3 or $4 a day when somewhere else they can make 7 or 8, the whole lot of them will pull up stakes and leave for the richer mines. Sometimes they are obligated to desert their own town when the mines give out. This was a case with Dayton. The place was started by miners who dug for gold, and when the mines ceased to yield, they were obligated to go off and seek their living elsewhere. We rode among the houses, of which there were 25 or 30, all log cabins with mud roofs. It was just at dusk, and the place looked most dismal and forlorn in that light. One can hardly imagine anything more desolate than these abandoned villages."
Anne was probably one of the first individuals to perform an urban exploration of the Twin Lakes area and document what she saw. I can only imagine how fascinating her visit to a newly abandoned mining community must have been. The cabins and shops of Dayton remained empty for the rest of the decade. Eventually, the surviving portions of Dayton were replotted and moved closer to the roadway that leads to Leadville. At the time, there were 10 other towns with the name of Dayton, and the U.S. Postal Service decided the new village would take the name of its most well-known feature, Twin Lakes. Some 196 residents still call the Twin Lakes village home as of the 2020 census. Despite the lack of a bustling town center, the mild climate and breathtaking scenery continued to draw visitors. In an 1876 issue of the Rocky Mountain News, a visitor identified only as REE boasted about the area's offerings, saying, "The lakes are an excellent place of resort for individuals and pleasure seekers. Trout fishing, hunting, and beautiful scenery offer great inducements to those who have the time and money to spare, and who delight in wild sports." Thankfully, an aspiring entrepreneur saw an opportunity to offer more than camping and abandoned bunkhouses to visitors. He set out to create a lakeside destination. Interlaken, originally named Lakeside Resort, was built in 1879 by John A. Staley and Charles Thomas. It started with humble beginnings and eventually boasted a 2-story hotel. The hotel was a popular mountain destination for people on the way over Independence Pass or nearby mining communities. The miners made their stop and the hotel rang with laughter and music. Towering pines sat on top of lush carpeted lawns of bluegrass. The lawn was dotted with sparkling water fountains, gardens, and native flower beds that bloomed throughout the summer. It was designed to respond to and enhance the picturesque mountain setting. The 1870 book, Health, Wealth, and Pleasure in Colorado, described the resort after Staley's improvements, saying, "The hotel and boarding house accommodations are good and will rapidly extend. During the summer months, there is an almost constant round of society picnics and private pleasure parties coming down to the lakes from Leadville, so that every day brings a fresh influx of visitors, enlivening the resort and dispelling the tendency to monotony. Twin Lakes is the highest of all popular Rocky Mountain resorts and furnishes an unfailing antidote for hot weather." Only 4 years after opening in 1883, it was purchased and expanded upon by a mining millionaire from Leadville named James V. Dexter. This was not his first foray into the resort industry. Other memorable resorts he constructed include Evergreen and Idlewild Lodge. The Interlaken Resort was one of his most ambitious undertakings. After adding 2,000 acres of land, a dance hall, a tavern, a 16-horse stable, an ice house, guest rooms with panoramic views, servants' quarters, and a couple of hexagon-shaped privies that were considered state-of-the-art restrooms. This is because each of the 6 sides were reserved for specific guests of the hotel. Essentially, they were private restrooms. Additionally, they featured seldom-seen amenities such as leather seats and fragrant flowers. In the mid-1890s, Dexter constructed a personal cabin that spared no expense and is one of the most interesting structures on the property. Dexter's cabin, as it became known, more resembled the mansions of its time, featuring imported wood trim, open verandas, gabled dormer windows, a mansard roof, and is crowned with a glass-enclosed cupola with views in all directions. In its time, the cabin was outfitted with elaborate rugs, maple furniture, and high-end decor. A decor that was influenced by Dexter's fondness for playing poker and hunting, creating a deep, rich tone that demonstrated Dexter's lavish lifestyle. The building's architecture reflects Dexter's nautical interests, yet somehow does not seem out of place here in the Rocky Mountains. Near Dexter's cabin, in 1895, a man named John F. Campion built a private summer home for his bride that aimed to surpass Dexter's cabin. Similar to Dexter, John also made his fortune in the Leadville mining industry, as well as Colorado sugar beets, among other businesses. His ownership and operation of the most productive regional gold mines, the Little Johnny and Ibex mine, is what catapulted Leadville into the second largest city in Colorado. His Twin Lakes villa was large enough to accommodate a bowling alley, electrical power plant, shooting gallery, and a dais stage, or playroom. The Campion family used the stage often, because in those days, people were fond of amateur plays, or as they called them, theatricals or charades. As soon as you entered the door, you were greeted by a series of costumes, encouraging guests to put them to good use. Mr. Campion was described by his childhood caretaker and long-term housekeeper, Mrs. Edwards, in a 1959 interview with Colorado Magazine. She said he was a very amusing man who had nicknames for his friends and family. She went on to say that Mr. Campion referred to his wife as Flannel Mouth or Pokey. Other terms of endearment he used included Fatty for his daughter Helen. Let's hope that meant something a little different in the 1800s. The villa represented the Campion family's whimsical nature. For example, the foyer contained a large wood carving of a bear that they used as a hat rack, where Mr. Campion's hat was often perched inside the mouth of the bear. Their Irish roots were proudly represented in a rough stone fireplace with a carved Gaelic saying, and forgive me, but Sad Mil Phil, meaning 100,000 welcomes. The decor reflected their love for Swiss culture, blended with their Celtic traditions. One such example was the largest painting in their living room, which was of the Lion of Lucerne monument in Lucerne, Switzerland. Mr. Campion would drive his 2-seat road wagon to Leadville Monday mornings to his office and would return Friday evenings. Occasionally, Mrs. Campion and Mrs. Edwards would accompany him part way and walk back. Mrs. Edwards recalled one of these trips where they were chased by a big black cow, saying,
"A few cattle were grazing loose by the road. The cow had probably never seen a woman. We all ran for our lives and made for a dilapidated outhouse with the door hanging on one hinge. We got in and held the door while the cow took out her anger on the door. We remained there for some time before the animal got tired, and we were able to get out and make for the fence and home."
At a certain point, Mr. Campion learned that the lower lake was to be used for irrigation and his home would be submerged by water. He promptly sold the property and left his operations to his former housekeeper, Mrs. Edwards. For a time, she put the 14 lavishly appointed guest rooms to good use by running the home as the Campion Hotel. Saying in 1959, if any of the people who were guests at Twin Lakes are alive, they can tell you of the good times that were had at the Campion home. Some of the young men went off to the Spanish War and never returned. I imagine that all these people have passed on and that I am the only one left who remembers Twin Lakes when it was the center of social life in the Leadville area. Before the irrigation project could be completed, the Campion Hotel burnt to the ground, leaving behind only the memories of the Campion family and the hotel patrons. Meanwhile, Lakeside Resort continued to improve. Its barn and stables had become like nothing else in the region, featuring a tack room, hay loft, 16 stalls, and carriage storage. Another barn that unfortunately has fallen to ruin accommodated milk cows, chickens, and additional food storage. At this juncture, the resort received its new name, Interlaken, named after a traditional resort in the mountains of Bernese Oberland in central Switzerland. This is especially fitting because this region of the Rocky Mountains is commonly referred to as the Switzerland of America. Charles Dexter's improvements created a world-class resort in the wilderness. His goal of elevating the resort to a higher class of clientele was achieved. His property rivaled the internationally recognized Broadmoor Resort and the town of Aspen, Colorado. The resort possessed some of the best facilities of its time and grew to become an extremely popular stop for well-to-do travelers passing through to nearby towns. Flocks of people came to fish, horseback ride, picnic, play croquet, or cross the lake in steam-powered boats. Visitors often relaxed in the tavern or pool hall, where they were delighted by billiard tables with inlaid rare woods or ivory and gourmet multi-course meals. Every week during the summer, the Leadville Orchestra would play in the hotel pavilion, where Civil War-themed oil paintings covered the walls. The book Health, Wealth, and Pleasure in Colorado said that even in midsummer, flannels are necessary articles of apparel, and thick woolen blankets are indispensable at night. During the winter months, activities such as skiing, skating, and sleigh riding were common amusements. As ice blanketed the lakes, teams of horses drew sleds with visitors across the frozen lakes. The relative luxury, coupled with the rustic mountain setting, proved to be a powerful draw for wealthy families year-round. In the early years, during the summer, guests journeyed by train to Granite, where they boarded a side-seated platform wagon that carried them 5 miles around the lake to the southeast side of Twin Lakes. A boardwalk existed to escort visitors from the wagon stop to the front porch of the hotel. But as we know, the good times did not last. Interlaken was regarded as Colorado's most beautiful resort throughout the late 19th century. Dexter's resort successfully operated for 25 years before it began to fall out of favor after his death in 1899, eventually closing in the early 20th century. The first blow to the growing community was the addition of a dam connecting the two lakes in 1896. This change raised the water levels and destroyed the only roadway to the Interlaken Resort. Despite being accessible by boat, this alteration caused a portion of the water to become stagnant, and much of the lake was too shallow to enjoy. This change brought with it mud, mosquitoes, and an outbreak of the disease malaria. At the time, this disease was the leading cause of infectious death in America. Once the word of the outbreak got out, the majority of the guests opted to protect themselves from risks of exposure and no longer attended. The flow of visitors slowed to a trickle, and after 17 years of growth and 25 years of operation, the structures fell into dereliction and eventually led to the closure of the property by the state of Colorado in 1950, 71 years after its founding. In the early 1970s, plans to build a higher dam and expand the reservoir threatened to flood and submerge many of the abandoned structures. Fortunately, the site was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. In 1979, the Bureau of Reclamation began to record and stabilize the structures, giving the area its new name, Twin Lakes Historic District. Once the dam was complete, to avoid the rising waters, several structures were lifted and moved 150 feet to higher ground. The structures remained derelict in this position for another 25 years. Between the first abandonment and the relocation, almost a century had passed, while the resort and its buildings were left abandoned and deteriorating. In 2001, Colorado Preservation listed Interlaken as one of the most endangered places in Colorado. That same year, a group of local volunteers began an effort to stabilize and restore the structures. The work began in 2004 and was completed in 2008, after 4 long years of hauling materials across the lakes. Today, some of the resort's structures remain, and hikers are invited to explore the site and tour themselves through the preserved buildings. This tour includes the 6-sided privy, granaries, cabins, and hotel. One of the most well-preserved buildings, Dexter's cabin, remains open to the public and is free to tour inside and out. If you choose to visit, please enter the cabin through the front door, facing the lake, and please be sure to latch the door when you leave. The masterfully restored interior features one-of-a-kind wood floors, intricate doorknobs, a wood-paneled bathtub, and original walnut woodwork. Backcountry hikers are welcome to view the restored interior and climb to the top, where they enjoy a panoramic view of the lake from the cupola. Word to the wise, watch your head on the way up. At one time, the stable was open to the public, featuring a group of old carriages and other relics. Unfortunately, it is no longer open to the public and has been cleared out. The resort site can be accessed by boat or a hiking trail that starts at the southeast end of the larger lake. Camping is not permitted in the area. For a safe and suitable campsite, please visit the Leadville Ranger District campgrounds for a list of choices. The hike consists of an undulating wooden path that is perched on the lake's edge and smells of wild sage and fresh mountain water. The total round trip is 4.7 miles, with an elevation gain of 760 feet. It's a great hike for families who are looking for a half-day hike with a lunch at the historic Interlaken Resort. The porch surrounding Dexter's cabin is a picturesque place to enjoy a picnic and the breathtaking scenery around the historical structures. Again, if you do visit the resort, there is no camping, and please do be respectful of all the hard work that these volunteers have put in to continually restoring these structures so as other generations can enjoy them. I really do appreciate you spending some time with us today, and please do take a moment more to like, comment, and subscribe.